Expectations were high for Texas this season after back-to-back playoff appearances, right on the doorstep of playing for the national championship game. Played for the SEC championship last season. Texas was the number one team in most preseason rankings. And of course, a lot of that went to Arch Manning stepping into the starting role and the job Steve Sarkisian has done, accumulating a ton of roster talent down in Austin. But after Saturday's game against Georgia, the loss puts Texas at 7-3, likely outside the college football playoff. So Kyle, the question I wanted to pose to you today, is Texas the most disappointing team in college football this season?
Steven, I'm not so sure that they're the most disappointing team, but they're definitely up there. You look at the preseason number one team in the country, as you said, to already have 3 losses, essentially be outside of the SEC championship picture, won't be making a return trip to Atlanta this season. The college football playoffs, it looks like they won't be back there either. There's still a pathway, but you look, this is a team that hasn't won a true road game away from Austin in regulation. They had those 2 overtime games against Kentucky and Mississippi State, lose at Florida, and then you lose at Ohio State and Georgia. And in any season, those losses wouldn't necessarily be disqualifying, but the loss at Florida and the way the Gators season has gone is truly what's just taking Texas out of the postseason contention. And Arch Manning as the preseason Heisman favorite. Texas is the number one team in the country. They definitely neither Arch or the Longhorns have lived up to that hype. But I do think that there's maybe some other teams that are worthy of mention. Do you think that Texas is the most disappointing team?
I do not. I think Texas has been a disappointment, but I do not think they are the most disappointing team in the country this year. For a couple reasons. I mean, number one, I do think Arch Manning has played a lot better over the last couple weeks, and I think the question is how fast does he get to that 5-star talent and kind of reach his potential? I think that's still, I think maybe that path is a little bit longer than maybe we anticipated. I also think Texas, from a defensive standpoint, the last couple of weeks, they've given up over 30 points. We're talking to Mississippi State, Vanderbilt, and of course, Saturday night's game against Georgia. So both sides of the ball share blame here, but it is puzzling that Texas, especially with Sarkisian and the way they've developed the offensive line and the skill talent, Arch Manning has been throwing some nice passes at times that have been dropped. Obviously, Texas has not been able to run the ball at all this season, and we saw this on Saturday night against Georgia. I mean, in the last 3 meetings against Georgia, in basically one calendar year, they have less than 100 combined rushing yards. Talk about 3 games. So you think about Texas and comparing them to Georgia. Georgia has been the standard in the SEC, especially since Nick Saban has retired at Alabama. So, a lot of problems at Texas, but you mentioned the schedule, Kyle, and they could have lost to Kentucky, they could have lost to Mississippi State. Had they just beaten Florida, we'd probably be talking about, hey, if this team beats Texas A&M, they've got a chance to still go to the playoff. Which brings me to the rest of the season. How does Texas salvage what's been a disappointing season so far?
They got to win out. They have to beat Arkansas and beat A&M, and then hope things kind of fall their way these next 2 weeks. They really just have to pray that some of the teams in front of them, like a Vanderbilt, like an Oklahoma, who they have a head-to-head win over, lose, and they don't control their own destiny, by any means, but they can do what they can to sort of bridge this gap and end up in the at-large discussion, because a win over Texas A&M would be one of the best wins, maybe even the best win in the country. That game is at home in Austin, and the Longhorns do close the season out at home, and they could still sneak in the at-large discussion. That's why I don't think that they're the most disappointing team, and I will get into some of those here in a second. But I think that Texas is just going to be rooting on the downfall of some of these teams in front of them, and really hope that they can just barely sneak into that at-large discussion. With a win over A&M, I think that they might have a case, but it just depends on some of these teams in front of them. Like you said, a lot of these teams are kind of bunched up with head-to-head wins or head-to-head losses over one another. You look at Vanderbilt versus Texas versus Oklahoma. Also, you could make a case, of course, the standard at Texas is national championships, but a season where you beat Oklahoma, your rival, and you beat Texas A&M, your rival, I don't think many fans in Austin would be disappointed with that outcome, even though, maybe missing out on the college football playoff.
Yeah, I think you're right about the standard. I mean, the standard should be the college football playoff for Texas, especially when you have those back-to-back appearances. And, preseason expectations are kind of what they are, but just judging by the way Texas has recruited and the talent level and the schedule this year, they should have been in the playoff. But like you said, Kyle, they get Texas A&M at home. The team that's undefeated in SEC play, they get a chance to play spoiler. Anytime you can beat your rival, regardless of what the records are, and especially with Texas trying to end the A&M undefeated season, that would be a nice capper to what has been a disappointing year, obviously, for Texas. I do think when it comes to the playoff, it's going to take chaos, and it's going to take a lot of things to break Texas' way. You just look at the kind of the way this is going to break down, like BYU, Utah, Miami, Notre Dame. It's going to be hard, I think, to fight back into that at-large discussion. But any chance they have, even if it's a slim one, starts with chaos and ends with a victory over Texas A&M. So certainly it has been a disappointing season, but I would argue that they are not the biggest disappointment in college football this year. So Kyle, if it's not Texas, who is the biggest disappointment this season?
Yeah, Steven, this has been a wild season. I think there's a few options that we can kind of go through. You want to bring up Penn State, the preseason number 2 team in the country, fired their head coach, might not make a bowl game, only recently beat a power conference opponent for the first time. I mean, this season just totally went south for the Nittany Lions, and you see James Franklin now the head coach at Virginia Tech before this season that was supposed to end with him and Penn State back in the college football playoff even ended. So, there's definitely a case that Penn State could be there. And also Clemson is a team that we thought would be at the very least in the ACC championship discussion. And the Tigers are also still fighting for bowl eligibility. The season also just kind of went south there for Dabo Swinney and the Tigers. You could make a case another team, LSU, another team that fired its coach, was embarrassed by Texas A&M. We just talked about the Aggies in Death Valley at home. That's just not a venue where LSU is losing a night game very often. So there are quite a few top 10 teams in the country who are just not even some might not even go bowling this year, much less be making the college football playoff, which is why I think Texas, though disappointing, is not necessarily in the same. Steve Sarkisian is not getting fired at this point in the season. So you look at some of these teams that didn't even have their head coach finish out the year. I think you pointed Penn State, LSU, and then even Clemson, just the way their season goes. Are any of those three come to mind for you? Do any stand out?
Kyle, I think the answer is Penn State, because everything seemed aligned for Penn State to finally take that next step. And certainly that was a criticism for James Franklin coming into the year. He couldn't beat Ohio State. He couldn't beat top 5 teams, but you had Drew Aller back. You went into the portal and got your receivers. For the most part, this roster that made it to the college football playoff semifinals and maybe was one drive away from beating Notre Dame and playing for the national championship sits here at 4-6. And I think you could argue there's kind of like 2 different Penn States this year. The start of the season, that roster was different with Drew Aller and the expectations. And once you start losing games and you fall out of the playoff chase, this has been a different team. They have completely fallen apart since losing to Oregon and that overtime game. But just thinking about the way that this season was supposed to play out, Ohio State lost a lot of pieces off the national championship game. You had Michigan breaking in a lot of new faces, especially with the true freshman quarterback. You just looked at this and said, the teams that had retained roster talent, Michigan, Ohio State, had done really well the last couple of years, and Penn State really fit the mold on kind of the team with roster retention, timely portal acquisitions, and they upgraded arguably a defensive coordinator with Jim Knowles coming in to take over the play calling duties. So, from I think a disappointment standard, just the fact that Penn State might miss a bowl game. Yes, they didn't. They could have fallen short and missed the playoff, but they're not even in the mix at this point to go to a bowl game. To me, is the biggest disappointment. I do think on Clemson too. When you think about Clemson and the path in the ACC, Florida State's down. Miami is, at 2 losses. You get scenarios where Georgia Tech, Virginia, Duke, Pitt. I mean, there's a lot of teams still fighting in the ACC. And you look at this Clemson roster and go, how are they just fighting for bowl eligibility? I mean, whether it's the offense with Cade Klubnik maybe not reaching its potential, and certainly on defense as well. So, Kyle, I would rank it Penn State as the most disappointing team, followed by Clemson, and then Texas. Does that order sound good to you?
Yeah, I definitely agree. That as the pyramid of disappointment this season.
Yeah, it has been a crazy college football season. We still have conference title races. We've got the race to the college football playoff. We've got coaching craziness in the carousel. Stay tuned to Athlon Sports for coverage of all of that. And also let us know in the comments, is Texas the most disappointing team in the country? Let us know your pick if it's Texas or some other team.